Welcome back for many. Wow, the numbers are really pouring. That's huge. That's really huge. So, as everyone continues to chime in, we'll start off with introductions of myself and my co-host, Cameron Pion. So today, you have me, Marlo Brooks, student assistant and student at Cal State San Bernardino. Um, I work for Cameron and myself. Both work for the Santos Manuel Student Union's Cross Cultural Center, which is our multicultural division on campus, where we host a variety of events for different ethnicities and backgrounds, just promoting and spreading awareness and similarities and differences as well between different backgrounds and cultures on our campus, just to create that one in sync moment, that in sync bond for students on campus. So it's definitely a enhancement to student life on campus as well. So me and Cameron get to take the lead and hosting that, and very, very honorable job, one of the best to have on campus. So that's why you have us as hosts here to spread our experiences and things like that as well. So again, myself, I am Marlo Brooks. I'm a senior at Cal State studying English in the College of Arts and Letters. Um, Ultimate career goal, I would say, to be a university president. So we have a long way to go, but we are aiming high. And Cameron, would you like to tell a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, appreciate it. My name is Cameron Pion. I'm a fourth year English major at Cal State San Bernardino, of course. But some of the positions that I've taken on, like just working in the cross culture center, like Marlo has said, I am the male lead of the Pan African Center. We host a lot of different events and try to bring a lot of different crowds out so we could, get a lot more inclusivity and stuff like that. In terms of myself, my long-term goal in English is to most definitely be a professor for poetry. But being out here and being, pretty much front lines in terms of like trying to politic and see exactly what we are going to do in terms of our own PD and just exactly how we are going to change the systematic racism or the systemic racism that we're, involved in right now. So it's like that honestly been it's been shifting my mind a little bit. It's been altering it because it's like at the end of the day, the only people that can make those decisions are people who got those positions of power. So it's like, maybe I have to shift my English degree into something like that as well to see what else I could pull out from that. But in terms of myself, just keeping up the fight, man, doing what I can.
It's amazing. And another amazing feature to that is it's crazy how as the days progress and as times change, your focus can change a little too, and you find a better purpose to serve. So that's great. I know I started off in English to be a teacher, and now I want to be a university president, because you find different ways that you see that you can serve best with your tools. As you come out with those degrees, you're armed with tools to take on this world. So our career goals alter from that. So it's amazing to see that in you as well. Again, you are on the front lines. You just organized a peaceful protest weeks ago, didn't you?
Yeah. No, it's been going pretty good in terms of everybody that's showing up. We all have the same idea. We all pretty much thinking of the same plan. What exactly are we going to do to make it safer for everybody that's within this world in terms of different communities? Like, there's a lot of impoverished neighborhoods, a lot of neighborhoods in poverty when they don't even have to be. Like, how are we going to defund the police to where it's like those neighborhoods will be able to have community-oriented programs that will actually better their lives instead of always, giving them a one route to the graveyard or the prison, because that's how it is right now in terms of those neighborhoods. It's like they're either a criminal or they're a person just trying to make it out of a system that's it has been so deeply rooted. So it's so I don't know. It's I don't know. Like just thinking about what's instilled in this world is crazy. I don't know.
Man, that's amazing. I myself am just honored to serve alongside you in our academic journey, man. I'm honored to have met you in this time, and the things that we've accomplished together so far, man. I can only see a better future for all of us with me and you on the front line. So just congratulations to you yourself. But as we get into today's event, conversations on race and policing, I want to introduce a few of our panelists today and give them a chance to speak to you. First, we're going to start with Dr. RAFIK MOHAMED, which we call him Dean MOHAMED, on our campus. Say hello, Dean.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. MARLO, Cameron, everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you. Also, we have KATHRYN ERVIN. I'm sorry, we call her Kathy, on our campus. Say hello.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here.
There we are. All right, we have Dr. ALEXIS NORRIS and Dr. ZACHARY Powell on the line today.
Hi, glad to be here.
And yeah, I'm also glad to be here. Happy to be part of this ongoing conversation.
Great. Welcome, Dr. Powell. We also have Anthony Roberson, the mayor of CSUSB, we call him.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you, Marlo and Cameron, for having me. I appreciate it.
And also one of our newer professors on campus who certainly made his mark, Dr. Mark Robertson.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation and hearing from all the panelists.
All right. So I want to thank all of our panelists for being here today. I hope I didn't miss anyone. But I want to thank you all for being here today. And before we start today's event, I want to start off with acknowledging the land that we CSUSB sits on with our land acknowledgement. Some people may ask, what is a land acknowledgement? It's a formal statement that recognizes and respects the indigenous people and given in the geographical area that we sit on, that our campus sits on. It's an ancestral territory, and we just like to give acknowledgement to that whenever we do a function together. So I would like to take the time to acknowledge that. So we recognize that CSUSB sits on the territory and ancestral land of the Santos, of the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. We recognize that every member of the California State University of San Bernardino community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1965. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationships to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold CSUSB more accountable to the needs of American Indian and indigenous people. So we thank you.
And appreciate that, Marlo. So to begin on this conversation on race and policing, during this conversation, we will talk about many different issues related to racism, racial violence, and police brutality, and just impact within the community. As we're conversating this, as we're holding this conversation, what we want to do is pretty much figure out what exactly we are going to do, what steps are we going to take, against oppression, against police brutality, white supremacy, racial discrimination and injustice. And, everybody within the chat, I'm pretty sure we'll have a opportunity for everybody to speak, get their points across and stuff. Well, not everybody, because it's, it's a bunch of people within here, but, I feel like we'll have a great conversation regarding all of these different topics. To all the panelists, they're well-informed on each of these topics. And I believe it will be a great conversation. So we want to start off the conversation by just asking or just from hearing the thoughts from Ms. Kathy ERVIN.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone that's listening. I am really grateful to be here, and I want to give a special thanks to my technological friends who are making this possible in this particular time. As one of the people who said, oh no, I will never be using this technology. And now I'm finding myself faced with plenty of it. I am speaking to you today from my position as a full professor in the Department of Theater Arts. And I thought what I would offer to this conversation is the artist's voice and the importance of artistic content and cultural content as we move forward. These have been some very difficult days, and especially my colleagues in the struggle, I want to remind you that this is a marathon. This is not a sprint. So if you thought this week was hard, get yourself together, because it's not even over yet. I brought with me my good friend Gwendolyn Brooks, who wrote these words in 1945. I had to kick their law into their teeth in order to save them. However, I have heard that sometimes you have to deal devilishly with drowning men in order to swim them to shore, or they will haul themselves and you to the trash and the fish beneath. When I think of this, I do not worry about a few chipped teeth. And she wrote that in 1945. 1945, that's quite a while ago. And here we are again in that cultural moment. So the other thing I was thinking about in terms of Gwendolyn and how long she wrote and struggled and what we're in now is that you have to be in it to win it. I am hearing a lot from my students and colleagues that we're tired. I know some of, especially the students, are saying, well, you know, maybe I could take that quarter off. Maybe I could do that other thing. Let me assure you that no. Nothing changes unless you get in there to change it. Now, let me assure you that there are some people here to help you and inspire you while you're going about that business of change. I want you to remember that there is an Aretha Franklin and a Shirley Caesar and a Smokey Robinson and a Farrell and a John Coltrane and a Jimi Hendrix and a Larry Neal and an August Wilson, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, who all have something to say about what's going on right now and have something to say about the ways we can keep on keeping on. I think also the other piece of that, not only to revive ourselves with the culture that we are so proud to be the inheritors of, but also to be attentive to the mythology that is feeding the current moment. And I was talking with a colleague about the fact, where do we get the idea that Black men are dangerous? That Black people are dangerous? How can you be the poorest people in the world, the most economically disadvantaged, and be the most dangerous? So that's clearly a myth, right? That's not a fact. That is a myth that Black people are dangerous. So how do we combat the myth? And that's the work of cultural warriorship. That means that we all have an obligation to listen to what's being put out there, to hear what's being put out there, and to respond to what's being put out there. The stories that we tell and the stories that are being told about us, because right now there's some very dark stories that are being told that are not the truth about Black people. I think we sometimes are a little bit insular. We want to keep our cultures to ourselves because they're so fabulous and wonderful and amazing. I think we've got to do some more work in getting that information out there. I think all people, and this was my awakening this year, was when I go into a classroom to talk about something, particularly something historical, I have to say to myself, well, wait a minute. You know, we talk about the ancient Greeks. Greece is a very small place. Okay, where was everybody else in 300 BC? They didn't all just arrive, right? So we have to use all of our senses, be consciously awake and aware. We have to appreciate all we have to offer and all that is being offered to us. And keep in mind that courage is about overcoming fear and moving forward. Everyone is afraid. The courageous ones are the ones who choose to make the next step. So I hope we can keep that in our minds as we move forward. And I'll thank you for giving me this time.
Oh, we thank you. I think I, of many, needed to hear those words, you know, becoming accustomed to change and, you know, still taking advantage of the time we have in front of us and really making the most out of it. So I thank you for those words. At this time, I would like to remind everyone that at the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A function button. If you have any questions, just place them in there. We will get to your questions after our panelists are all introduced. So as we move forward on our panelist list, I would like to next introduce and bring forward Dr. RAFIK MOHAMED as he give you his spiel in today's climate.
Well, thank you, Marlo. And as Dr. Irvin said, thank you, Professor Irvin. Thank you to everybody else who helped make this possible, including the tech people behind the scenes who made it work. And Jeremy Murray for his role in helping coordinate this too. I will be brief or try to be brief. I know that's not my strength, but I will work to achieve that today. You know, when I was asked if I would participate in this last week, and I said no. Because for two reasons. One was it was still really raw for me, like it was a lot of people, and I just didn't feel like sharing. I was kind of angry, like a lot of people, and just didn't feel like you know, being on stage virtually and kind of sharing how it impacted me. And the other reason was I wanted to hear what other people had to say, because I knew that would help me kind of frame how I was going to respond to all of this too. So I really valued last week's conversation, and I'm flattered to be here this week. With respect to how this affects me, I just want to say a couple of things. One, personally, you know, it's disappointing because, as I said a few years ago, when I was asked to give some remarks at our university's Black graduation event, you know, this is the same story I was hearing when I was in the shoes of our college students who were graduating that year. When I graduated from college, it was right after the Rodney King, the officers who beat Rodney King were acquitted, and LA was up in smoke. And the soundtrack of my life at that point was a lot of hip hop music that was talking about, you know, social injustice and things like that. And it seemed in 1992 that there would be an opportunity for some change. Obviously, you know, fast forward to any period after that, but certainly looking back at 2015, 2016, and now that change hasn't come about. So personally, it really deeply affects me because I've seen this act before, and I hoped I wouldn't have to see it again. Professionally, it disturbs me because this is what I've studied my whole career. The reason why I became a sociology professor and a criminology professor was because I was an accounting major when I started college, and I was living in DC at the time and seeing some of these very same things that we're discussing today happening all around me, but also seeing how people on my college campus were treated a lot differently from people who were from ordinary street folk. And that kind of inequality, aside from my own lived experiences of dealing with the police and everything else, you know, really stirred me to want to pursue something outside of accounting because accounting wasn't giving me the answers to the questions that I had at that time. So I've looked at all of this my whole career, and it's still, you know, it's frustrating to me that as I was working on my dissertation, or as I was working on my master's thesis, or as I was writing papers in college, that I was citing people who were saying exactly the same things that we're saying today, and yet no change substantively has really come. So that, you know, is distressing to me as someone who's devoted kind of an academic lifetime, at least, to pursuing these kinds of things. Just a few, this isn't going to be completely bleak. So just a few other quick things. You know, when I think about how we got here and why we're still here, and it reminds me of this article I read once that the subtitle was, Americans get the world wrong because we get ourselves wrong. And a lot of it had to do with it. The author of the piece wrote, "Solipsism is a perennial American temptation." And he was essentially arguing that we're so fixated on our own personal lives and validating ourselves that we don't see kind of the broader world around us, including the broader injustices around us. And I think that's part of the reason why we're here. You know, for a lot of folks, what we're talking about today isn't their reality. And so they haven't really cared. I've been thinking a lot about why this moment in particular seems different. You know, Cameron, you were talking the other day about the protests that you've been a part of, and how, you know, multi-ethnic and multi-generational they are, which strikes me as different from other eras that I've been around in the past. And that really kind of heartens me. And with respect to kind of, you know, where we go from here, one of the things that I teach the history of, I teach the Black experience in America, but also kind of how all that began with the transatlantic slave trade. And there's this book that I teach sometimes by an author and historian named Adam Hochschild, and the book is called Bury the Chains, and it talks about the abolitionist movement in Britain leading up to slavery, leading to the end of slavery throughout the British Empire. And in his book, I pulled up the epilogue over here just so I could share, but at the very end of his book, he talks about what was different, because people have been trying to end slavery for hundreds of years to no effect. And he writes, just in part, he says, he's talking about these members of the clergy who were trying to end slavery. And he said that all of the 12 were deeply religious, and the 27-year-old Clarkson wore Black clerical garb, but they also shared a newer kind of faith. They believed that because human beings had a capacity to care about the suffering of others, exposing the truth would move people to action. And then he later writes, he says, the way to stir men and women to action is not by biblical argument, but through the vivid, unforgettable description of acts of great injustice done to their fellow human beings. The abolitionists placed their hopes not in sacred text, but in human empathy. And I bring that up not to dismiss the very important role religion has played in advancing social justice and civil rights agendas over time. But what feels different to me now is kind of like what Hochschild was talking about in that book, when people really saw face to face over and over again the brutality that our criminal justice system so readily exacts against certain kinds of people. And also now, when they see that those certain kinds of people have been joined by other kinds of people, and the criminal justice system has been reacting to them in much the same way, I think we are at a moment in time where real change might come about, because the power of human empathy, I think, is significant. More people are empathizing with the plight of Black people and Black men in particular in this context. And I am hopeful that that will bring about some positive change, but it's going to take everybody in this room and everybody else to really work toward that goal. So thank you.
I appreciate that, Dean. No, that's a show, quite frankly, like that was a great word. I mean, everything you said was pretty much like that plays into what's going on in today, like being that we've been fighting this for forever, to the point where it's like, you know, it's the same thing that you we're talking about in school and stuff like that, and then it's like the same problem. And I feel like that is because a lot of people don't, well, I don't want to say a lot of people don't do this, but it's like it isn't as consistent for them, just because of they like within their own lives they have all these other different things and that they got to go to. But it's like at the end of the day, the people who are all protesting right now, everybody that's in the street is oppressed in some type of way. Like every generation that they have had has you know, felt a way about the way we've been killed in the street, but the only thing is we feel it every time it happens. And it's like I don't know, like when it dies down and it ceases and stuff like that, it's like at the end of the day we're still Black. Like that's something we can't just escape and stuff like that. So unless the system gets diminished completely, we're never going to be able to live it, like just live within it to where we're just comfortable in our skin. So I agree with you on that. Up next, another one of our panelists, I'd like to introduce Dr. Alexis Norris.
Hello, everyone. First, I would just like to thank you all for inviting me to the panel to speak. I really appreciate the opportunity. And I'm a assistant professor in the criminal justice department. And so many of the things that have been going on right now are things that we talk about, things that we teach about, things that we've known for a very long time, and trying to understand how to make it something that the larger society becomes more aware of. And I think we are at that point now. Similar to being Mohammed, when this first happened, people asked me how I felt, and I didn't know how to feel because it's something I've seen. And the question was, will this be similar to every other time I've seen it? Is it going to be a short protest riot and then everybody forgets again until something very similar happens? And you can see a difference, as was mentioned, in kind of what things look like now in terms of actually trying to address change in a way that will stick, in a way that people will think matters for years and years and years to come. But I think one thing, and I struggled to think about what I was going to talk about in my 5-minute time, because there's so much you can talk about. There's so many things that we could talk about and address. But I think one of the things I wanted to really mention, because this is something I talk about a lot, especially to my students, is really looking at young people. And that this starts, when I say young people, I'm talking 5, preschool, and how this starts early. This idea of the extra surveillance or control or issues that you have to go through early in life that compounds and manifests over time, that builds for a lot of young people. And so, you know, they talk about this idea of the adultification of young children, especially their behaviors, especially children of color, where their behaviors that are behaviors that children commit are punished harsher, are made to seem like they should know better because we perceive them as older or different. And so we punish their behaviors a lot more. And this is a cycle that happens early on. And so it is, to me, like a societal kind of shift in how we understand and think about these things. You know, it happens when they go into school. Behaviors that children commit are being policed, are being arrested. You have children who are arrested for fighting in school who are charged with assault, going to juvenile detention centers. There have been cases over the years where, you know, 2 young men who were sagging in school got arrested for indecent exposure and were in juvenile detention for 48 hours. And so these behaviors that can be addressed in more holistic, better ways are often punished for certain individuals. And so, you know, this is a large ask, and, you know, as KATHRYN says, we need to do the baby steps, but it is about a shift in how we think about the way we address individuals broadly, how we address their behaviors. The don't go to punishment and chastising right away, and actually think about why these behaviors are occurring. You know, in the schools, you have children, you know, historically in disadvantaged areas where they experience a lot of trauma, a lot of poverty, and they act out. And when they act out, we punish their acting out instead of actually addressing why they act out. And so understanding, you know, in this way, how we actually shift our focus to look at trauma and counseling and approaching these behaviors in a very different way societally, as, you know, all of us, in a way that will really make a larger shift in what we're talking about. And so that is pretty much what came to my mind when I went through all the 100 other things I could talk about. But that's really kind of, to me, is very important, really looking at young people and, you know,
Right.
I've been studying.
And Dr. Norris, yeah, no, and Dr., I have to ask, in the spirit of everything that you just let out, do you think that the time for minorities, the time for asking is over? The time for, you know, asking for equality and justice, is that over? Are we demanding at this point?
I mean, it's always, we are all, you know, yeah, this idea that we are all people, we deserve to be treated the same way. And so for certain individuals to their behaviors to be seen differently is often problematic, and what leads us to focus and look at certain individuals differently, their behaviors, when it's the exact same behavior than others. And I mean, it's about, and I mean larger, this idea that everybody needs to understand, everybody needs to change how they actually view the way they respond to people more broadly, really getting at the root of these issues.
Thank you, Dr. Norris. And And in the spirit of professors, we are going to step over to Assistant Professor in the Department of Criminal Justice also, Professor or Dr. Zachary Powell.
Hi there. So thank you again for inviting me, allowing me to be part of this. So I guess in the spirit of moving forward, I guess I'll talk a little bit about something that I've spent a lot of time researching and understanding, you know, in terms of like police reform and why it becomes so incredibly difficult to see any kind of longstanding effective change. So I think if we look at police, right, like what makes them different from normal people, you know, one is that they have the ability to use force, you know, more so than anyone else, right? Two, they have the ability to search and seize whoever they want, pretty much whatever they want as long as they can justify it. And three, they have the discretion to make that decision whenever they want, right? When if they view it as an official duty of their capacity, then that's something that you know, not some people don't question at all, but and really the discretion of police officers is what's really complicating this, because I think most people would agree that in some situations police use of force is necessary and may be required. In some situations arresting or searching someone may be necessary, but what gets so upsetting and seeing it time and time again is seeing how the discretion to use those vast powers are abused time and time again, and has been in this country for decades, hundreds of years. And so what's troubling then is that, you know, there may be situations when there are, you know, individual officers who exhibit poor discretion where we want them to change, but there are also instances across this country where there are patterns and practices across entire police departments that are longstanding that have never been corrected, and without, you know, increased attention towards it, are not going to change at all. So the thing, what makes this particularly important, right, is that at the federal level, there is an ability to instigate and investigate and instigate reform into into law enforcement agencies. It's something that the federal government under the Trump administration has held back. They choose not to use this important tool that is really the only thing that can be done from a federal level to force change in police departments, but that's through the use of a consent decree. The idea behind this is that if we are able to investigate and to intervene into police departments that demonstrate longstanding practices of police misconduct, the goal is to force them to change it, right? And these examples include certainly abusive, unlawful, illegal use of force by police officers, illegal searches and seizures and detainees, the failure to investigate sexual assault cases, the unlawful use of canine units, racial profiling that occurs within cities. The federal government has the power to instigate and force reform for these issues. And it's something that is incredibly difficult to implement widespread, because the way that policing works in this country is that there are over 18,000 police departments in the nation. So while I think sometimes we tend to think of police as a single unit, and the reality is if we want to focus on change across the nation, we have to target widespread rather than only a minute fraction of police agencies. So what makes this really challenging, right, is that when you think about the investigation process and reformation, there's a lot of resistance within police departments. They don't want to rat on each other. They don't want to produce records that would, indemnify them or open them up to civil lawsuits. They're resistant to it. And when we think about what we actually want in terms of change, we want something that's that's going to be long lasting, right? So something that's not just like you finish making your reforms, but something that's going to last years in the future and can be self-correcting without reverting back to negative behaviors. The problem with this use of force is that it's highly political, and there are presidencies that make use of this tool and ones that are more reluctant to use that. The Obama administration was perhaps most active in using consent decrees to activate reform. The Trump administration is not. And so what I think when I hear a lot more about, when we find individual police departments that may have longstanding patterns or practices of misconduct, I think it's really incumbent upon us as a people when we demand for change in police departments to advocate for the use of this tool and to really request that happens. So advocate changes in updating in policies to limit the use of force, to limit the use of racial profiling, to limit the use of illegal searches and seizures, and to ensure that police departments actually maintain with these changes in the long term. So I think that's important conversations that we should think about in the upcoming election year. It's something that we should advocate for our Congress people, both in the Senate and the House, and something that should be part of the broader conversation about how do we prevent these ongoing problems from ever happening again.
No, those are all great points, Dr. Powell. Honestly, when thinking about that, it honestly sounds like because being that all we are fighting is police brutality, you know, racial injustices and racial discrimination, the police shouldn't be, they shouldn't be opposed to that. And that's a problem we gotta really look at, because it's like, why are they opposed to, you know, people receiving people receiving justice? Like if they are going to act like they are a cult against people receiving justice, people receiving you know, adequate living and stuff like that, where they don't have to be, you know, just in their neighborhoods, like wherever they are at geographically, and then it's like they're being, you know, looked at as criminals just because they're in their neighborhoods. And then that's one thing that I have a problem with in terms of the police department and stuff like that. Like the program isn't even long. It's like an 8-week program, and then it's like once you get an 8-week program, you're put into a neighborhood that you have never even been in before. There are so many different people that you don't know how to police, that you don't know how to navigate around and stuff like that. So it's like there's no way in 8 weeks that you can learn how to do all of that. But next we would like to introduce Anthony Roberson.
Thank you, Cameron. My name is Anthony Roberson. I serve as the Associate Director of the Santos Manuel Student Union, and it's a pleasure for me to be here. I would like to thank all of my esteemed colleagues that are a part of this panel. We have had an interactive dialogue over the last couple of weeks about social injustices of Black people in law enforcement throughout our nation. So I would like to thank our university for creating this platform for us to come together. But now it's time for action. I would like to share a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. So the call of action is accountability and the condemnation of racism and discrimination towards Black people in America. Our Black campus community here at CSUSB is hurting and in the need of healing and support. We're asking for our campus colleagues, surrounding communities from the Inland Empire to stand in solidarity with us and fight beside us when it comes to the injustices that we are facing on a daily basis. I would like to thank the Associate Students of Incorporated Board of Directors for their statement and support of the CSUSB Black community and standing with us in the fight for equality. I would like to also thank the Santos Manuel Student Union for crafting a statement of support for the CSUSB Black community and supporting our students and their beliefs in peaceful protests against injustices of Black men across the United States. The time is now for you that are listening to actively participate with us through providing support and statements condemning racism and discrimination when it comes to Black people. Holding your colleagues accountable when they say racist comments, holding your government officials accountable when the laws are not equitable for Black people to function in today's society. Case in point, the New York governor is currently working on the Amy Cooper bill that we've seen 911 calls which are racist-based false calls. A false 911 call based on race should be classified as a hate crime in the state of New York. If you have not seen the Amy Cooper video, I suggest you Google it for your own review. In this time of racial injustice, we are asking for our president, vice presidents, deans, faculty senate, and directors of our CSUSB departments to condemn racism, discrimination, and stand in solidarity with our Black CSUSB campus community and support the Black Lives Matter. As our brother George Floyd took his final breath on May 25th, our Black community breath was taken as well. and we haven't been breathing since. When will this all end? We have a group here at CSUSB that I have the pleasure of advising, Student African American Brotherhood. This group is made up of predominantly Black men, and they are a part of your community. They are in your classrooms, they work in your departments, they visit your offices to seek advice and mentorship. They serve on campus communities, and they are featured in campus publications. They need you to stand with them, support them, and protect them by all means, because they are coyotes and they will define the future, and they need you. Thank you.
That was heavy, Roberson, very heavy, and direct, intentional. And that's what we love about the CSUSB family, as we call it, because joining our university, you're welcome into a family of support and mentorship. And I myself had the pleasure of becoming your mentee as I entered the university, and the things that we've accomplished together, the transitions you've seen me embark on, the journeys, and you know, all of that is because of the leadership that I follow. And you know, as we say on campus, everything that we do on campus bleeds into the community. You are definitely the reason why, you know, I push so hard, push myself. Even when you tell me to slow down, I tell you I'm strong enough to do it. And so, and that's what I want the world and the community to know, as they listen, that the support level here for our students and community is unmatched at CSUSB. I've never seen that type of support on any other college or university campus that I've set foot on. All you guys ask in return is to succeed from your students, from your mentees, and from everyone on the campus. You just want to see them succeed, and we can't pay you back in any other form or fashion without doing so. You push us to that limit to make sure we succeed, and we use that ladder approach by pulling up everyone underneath us and around us. So I want to thank you for that. It is time to stand in solidarity with the Black community, and really protect each other, really support, really be there for each other right now in this time, so that we can reach that finish line, so that we can get things accomplished in this time. And, you know, it's time right now, and I just thank you for those words. As we wrap up with our final panelists, I want to remind you guys again, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. After we wrap up with our next panelists, we'll have a chance to open up the floor to all of our panelists to answer any questions. I'll read off the questions in the Q&A department, and see if any panelists would like to open up and see if they can answer any for you. So I will get into our final panelists. We have Professor Dr. Mark Robinson, who's going to take us off.
Okay, well, thank you, Marlo, for the introduction, and Cameron for co-hosting. Thank you to all my panelists, my co-panelists for being here, as well as everyone else who helped to put this event together. And of course, thank you all to the audience for joining us. As was said, my name is Professor Mark Robinson. I am a faculty member in the history department, assistant professor. Last week, I was honored to be a part of this conversation, and I offered some comments about some of the historical as well as contemporary context for our current moment. This time, I'd like to talk a little bit more about our theme of next steps. As we all know, Mr. George Floyd was tragically murdered a little bit over 2 weeks ago. And in this time, we have seen a range of responses from sadness to anger, determination, tragedy, outrage, and hope. In my brief remarks today, I would like to encourage us to add another response, vision. I want to encourage us, adding to what Mr. Roberson was just saying, to think about how both power, purpose, and vision can be combined to bring about some new changes in our world. As I think about this, I'd like us to reflect on the words of the great Black feminist writer, Audre Lorde. In a 1982 speech called Learning from the 60s, she said, and I quote, "In order to be whole, we must recognize the despair or oppression plants within each of us. That thin, persistent voice that says our efforts are useless. It will never change, so why bother? Accept it. And we must fight that inserted piece of self-destruction that lives and flourishes like a poison inside of us, unexamined until it makes us turn upon ourselves and each other." End quote. So let us push against that self-doubt, that poison of being defeated, and let us be visionaries for the world and the structural and institutional change that we would like to see. Let us be visionaries like the Sankofa bird, looking back as we move forward so that we can honor those who have been struggling before us. By that I mean our ancestors, as well as the many folks at CSUSB and around the community who have been in this fight and who have built the foundation that we now use to speak upon. Let us, through dialogue and coalition, create a shared vision so that we can be motivated and focused towards concrete collective action. So what should be the specifics of this shared vision? That's for us to figure out. We will decide that both as a group and as individuals. But I offer some suggestions or some ideas to all of us to perhaps get the conversation started. At our university, CSUSB, let's envision having recruitment, retention, and graduation of African-American students that surpasses all of our peer institutions. Let's envision a time when our campus, our university is the top choice for every African-American student and parent in the Inland Empire. Now, of course, there are many folks who are already working towards this vision. Some of them are the very folks on this panel with me today. But how can we strengthen and expand those efforts to promoting the student success for African Americans at our university? And hand in hand with that, of course, there are conversations about increasing the African American faculty and staff at our university as well. Let's think about that as we envision how to move forward. Beyond our university, imagine San Bernardino as a city that transforms vacant storefronts and empty retail spaces into resources to meet the demands of our community. Envision community gardens that address hunger. Envision abandoned buildings converted into creative spaces for our youth to explore passions in the arts, in science, in technology, in music, in theater, in poetry, and various other endeavors. Imagine night markets, outdoor concerts, free legal aid, mental health resources, by and for the community, all of which supported by CSUSB. Now, here again, I'm sure there are many folks who are already engaged in this work and bringing about the kinds of reforms that I'm talking about. So therefore, we should ask ourselves, how can their efforts be strengthened and expanded? As I bring this to a close, I want to remind us about some of the things that Professor Teixeira shared with us last week when she talked specifically about reforms in the criminal justice system. she mentioned many great ideas like requiring police officers to be residents in the communities that they police. She mentioned the idea of having mandatory screening, bias screening, not just training, but screening of police officers to make sure that they are aware of and perhaps eliminated if they have, proven bias and other kinds of prejudice. She mentioned civilian review boards as another way of holding law enforcement accountable, and others, right? So as we envision how to move forward, we can also think about how we can engage our elected officials in San Bernardino City, in the county, in the state and beyond about implementing the kinds of reforms that Professor Teixeira was talking about last time. So let us be visionaries. Let us be bold. Let us move forward together. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Robertson. I appreciate that. Everything you said, we do need to start thinking about how we're going to have these things implemented and like placed into our communities, because that really is a huge problem that we have right now. We always talk about doing something, or we make, baby steps and stuff like that. Oh, so just to get people to feel comfortable that, things are changing, then it'll be a very small change. And then, we'll never see the true benefits of what we actually desire and stuff like that. Like, I feel like another problem within our communities right now, and regarding this whole problem with everything that's going on, why people are responding to it differently. Like, say for instance, people are mad about the looting and the rioting. People are, they're worried about all that and stuff. But it's like, the main problem is, that should attack your sense of humanity and stuff. Like, when you see these different videos and stuff, and we're being killed like animals, like we're being hunted as if like the police don't care about our lives at all. And it's like, people always go to like, are those people following the law? And it's like, we tell them, okay, those people weren't even breaking the law. It wasn't even doing, they wasn't even doing nothing to where they had to lose their life like that. So where it was like, a cop took their life so wickedly and stuff like that. So being that's the point that we're trying to get across, is that, we're humans, and it's like, nobody deserves to die like that, especially if it's to the point where we're being racially profiled and stuff like that. Like, we're being killed unjustly. And this is why we're outraged as a people. We're not outraged because George Floyd died. We're outraged because how George Floyd died. He had a full life ahead of him, and it's like, he died because somebody racially discriminated against him and took it upon himself to do something wicked to that man's whole family tree. And it's like, that's why we're outraged. We're not outraged because, like, we're not destroying buildings or looting or doing all that other stuff because of one person's death. We're doing it because we never received justice. We're doing it because it makes you feel like, when stuff like this happens, it makes you feel like you're less, like, they're simply allowed to do that to like the color of your skin simply because of where you are geographically or anything like that. Also, another thing that we really need to do as a community is we need to learn how to respond to each other better, because it's like, we have all of these different stereotypes regarding each other, but that's simply because what's permanently instilled into this world is a racist white man's idea of how to navigate it. Like, we never even learned how to get along with each other in terms of all of our different ethnicities and stuff, because geographically, this person lives in a poor area, or this person lives in a rich area, or a more wealthy area and stuff like that. And then that's how we view each other, because it's like, if a person lives in a neighborhood to where they, are impoverished and stuff like that, they're gonna look at them as, people who live in the hood. And then they say like the hood is people like who it's just filled with criminals and stuff like that. But it's like, that's not what it is at all, because it's like, I could live in a good neighborhood, but I'm still Black. I could live in a bad neighborhood and I'm still Black. Like, that doesn't change anything. Like, I could get my degree, go to an impoverished neighborhood, and it's like, I could have my degree out there in that impoverished neighborhood, and I could still end up the same way with the police and stuff like that. Like, this is what needs to be registering into people's head, is that any minority, any oppressed person, especially any Black person that is within your faculty, within your staff, within your family, within your friend group, whatever it is, that could be the same person that died. Whenever we're outraged and we have to turn to this, like that could be that same person. And like that's the point that we are trying to get across, because it's like people just think like, oh, just another person died, a criminal or something. But it's like none of these people are even criminals. These are people who have families, and just, you know, like we always have to adapt to what the situation is. Like whenever we navigate through this world, we are navigating in a white man's world. That's all we're doing. But it's like nobody ever, like it seems like everybody fails to think about where we come from and what all of our not even to go all the way back to slavery, even though I can, but to the civil rights movement, when they were making a lot of progress towards our people, and then they were dismantled by the CIA and the FBI. It's like we were dismantled by our own government, and like just because we wanted to progress our people forward, just because we wanted to stop being killed and brutalized in the street, and now it's like we're still in the same spot because we've never had that answer. It's like, and nobody ever looks back as to all the traumas that we have to face, all the stuff that we have to grow up within and stuff like that, the impoverished neighborhoods, the poverty, the drugs and the gang violence that was instilled into our neighborhoods. Because that like it didn't just pop up. Like this stuff, like it was brought to us. Like there wasn't one day where when the world on drugs came, like somebody just said, oh yeah, I got drugs and this is going to like create this. Like no, that like it was all implemented into our neighborhoods and stuff like that. And then like the prison, the school to prison pipeline and stuff like that. Like we are geographically set into these places to where we are programmed to basically become criminals, programmed to have students to have students and people who are going to make it out and be the ones who beat the odds and stuff like that, but still have a chance to die to the system and die to the people who are law enforcers and stuff like that, just because of our demographic, just because of our ethnicity and the color of our skin and stuff like that. Like this it's real life, and it's so racially instilled into this world. It's so permanently instilled into this world. It's like, unless things change and people start actually understanding that the only person who is a criminal is a person who's doing criminal things. It doesn't matter what ethnicity they are. There is no way you could judge a person off of say that this person is a criminal just off of their ethnicity. So it's like, we need to learn how to talk to each other. We need to learn how to better navigate with each other, because it's like all these different microaggressions that we have to face as Black people, and then we just have to continue in the world because that's what it is. If you want to, you know, get a promotion in terms of a job, you have to learn how to, you know, take on those. You have to learn how to take on those with a straight face and pretty much just see how you're going to better your position. But it's like nobody ever takes the time and to consider everything that we have gone through and just who we are as a people and why there are certain people who are still stuck systematically. So a lot of things do need to change. I actually want to go to one of the first questions that from Patricia Rice Daniels. I hope that's how I pronounced it right. So a portion of Professor Ervin and Dean Mohamed's comments reminded her of a book titled The African Presence in Ancient America that came before Columbus by Yvonne von Sertima. And she wanted to know, have any of the panelists heard or read this book?
Yes.
Does any of it
a great text. It's a great place to start in terms of what is the history of African people.
Does a lot of it correlate to like today and stuff like that in terms of the reading, or what's within it?
Go ahead.
If I recall, it's been a little bit of time since I've encountered it or engaged it, but from if I remember correctly, it's sort of looking at how sort of the early history of African Americans or people of African descent in this hemisphere, right? And then sort of North and South America predates the established kind of official record, which really kind of comes down to slavery. And so kind of looking at how through various kinds of migration or kind of transatlantic travel, you have evidence like the Toltec heads in South America and so forth, which give evidence of an African presence sort of in a kind of pre-modern era. So perhaps if any other panelists would like to add anything on that, please do. But I think in terms of today, I think it definitely is part of the conversation, maybe as Professor Irwin was talking about, some of these stereotypes, some of these ideas like, you know, kind of the attitude that says, you know, Black people, go back where you came from, or you don't really belong here. You haven't contributed to this national product of America. And that's all garbage, right? You know, we've been here certainly throughout US history and even before the founding of this nation, struggling, building, you know, contributing, and so forth. And so as we look back, we can take strength from those histories. And I think as we look forward, be confident to say, no, you know, we deserve these rights. You know, we're not asking for anything, you know, special. We're not asking for anything that's unreasonable. You know, we're asking for the just treatment that we have earned, not only because of we're human beings, but because of all that we've contributed. And so we can be bold as we move forward.
I agree with you. Marlo is going to pretty much give the next question, but I just wanted to agree with that statement. I believe I was having a conversation with my brother Justin, and we was pretty much just having the same type of conversation. It's like I actually just forgot my thought. But go ahead, Marlo. If I come back, I'll say what I thought.
Thanks, Cam. We do have another question coming in from the attendees today. This question is coming from Jen. Jen asked a question to the panelists. What do I say to someone in my life who, when asked why they weren't fighting, they said, this isn't my fight? And also, the second part of that question is, what do I say to my white family members that live in the predominantly white communities when they say they don't believe that police brutality is worse for people of color? Any panelists would like to tackle that?
I think I'll take that. I think, you know, as I talked about it in my speech, I think it is your fight, you know. I think you have to talk to your family members, your white family members, and have them understand their white privilege, right? Even though they live in a predominantly white community and they don't understand how it feels with police brutality. I know I did an experiment with my friends over the weekend about how many times have you been pulled over by the police, right? And they said, I don't have enough fingers or toes to even count how many times I've been pulled over by the police. So as you think about, they don't understand the police brutality to people of color, and especially Black people, just turn on the news, just look at social media. These things are happening. This is not made up. This is happening. We are going through this every day. If you haven't learned from George Floyd, I don't know how to, I just don't know how you don't understand what's going on. I really don't.
You know, if I could piggyback off that, you know, the question of whose fight it is, you know, one of the things that really troubles me deeply is that, you know, all of this is under the umbrella of America. And we have founding documents that profess the equality of everybody and say that, you know, the blessings of liberty are to be bestowed upon everybody. We have the Constitution and the amendments to the Constitution, which very clearly spell out through particularly the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th Amendments, you know, what the rights of individuals are, particularly as it relates to the criminal justice system or what would become the criminal justice system. And so to the extent that, you know, it's not my fight, it is your fight. If you're an American and you believe in what this country is supposed to be, it is your fight. You know, when one of the classes I used to teach often was law and society, and we'd come through the Constitution, and I would begin by, you know, telling students that, you know, the Constitution is a work in progress. It's something the promises of it is something that was intentionally written to be to be a little bit vague so that we could always aspire to achieve its fundamental principles. So it is all of our fights. With respect to people who aren't willing to hear or who don't believe, whether it be the videos. I mean, the simple question is like, when have you ever seen something like that happen to a white person? And it has. I'm not saying it hasn't, but you can name 20 Black people in the past 5 years to whom something like this has happened. and Black people only make up 12 or 13% of the U.S. population. And this dovetails with a question that was also in the chat later. But even beyond that, you know, there's a question I would ask folks is who don't want to, you know, right after Minneapolis, the police department, there were data about disparate uses of force among the Black citizens versus the white citizens, things like that. If people aren't willing to even receive those data, I mean, the simple question I would ask them is, you know, what's at stake for you if it actually is true? Like, what do you stand to lose if this is actually true, if these disparities do exist? Because I think we don't spend a lot of time interrogating ourselves. And to paraphrase Cornel West, you know, it takes a lot of courage to interrogate ourselves, but we might not like what we find after that interrogation. And so again, the simple question is, you know, okay, you're not willing to see the data. You're not willing to look at the videos critically. What is it that you stand to lose if this is true? And I think for a lot of folks, that's a question they haven't asked themselves. And it might be something that helps kind of break down some of those barriers.
I'd also like to talk about this because one of those questions I frequently deal with, you know, as a white person for sure. First, outright, I also want to say, like, I'm obviously a white male. I have no idea what the experience is of anyone of the Black community in this country, so I understand that my perspective is only like as a white male. So I will only speak from that perspective. So I'll echo what's already kind of been said. I think Dean Mohammed took one of my points away because I think he's absolutely right. But, you know, a lot of these questions there's some people, and it doesn't matter what you say to them, how you say it, what evidence you say to them. It doesn't matter how aggressive you are. It doesn't matter how empathetic, how much of a listener you are. They simply will not change their mind. And it doesn't matter what they say. And there are some people, no matter how much evidence, how many stories you expose them to, only become further ingrained in them. They're reluctant to hold it all. And I think, to Dean Mohammed's point, is that, you know, it really takes a lot in someone to really acknowledge the possibility that you may be wrong, and wrong on not a minor issue, right? Something that maybe you have held on to for years. And so to admit to yourself that you were wrong about something that was bad, that was harmful, that affects millions of people, not only in this country, but across the world. And that by not saying anything, by not fighting with it, you've become complicit in allowing it because you have not advocated for any systematic change in our society. So I think one question that that frequently comes up is that, you know, understand that there are some people you cannot, they will not ever look inside, but that's what takes key. But something I always ask, regardless of the issue, is how did you come to that conclusion? Why do you believe that? Because that really triggers someone to think about, maybe pause for a moment and think, why do I think that? You know, because then if they're willing to know more, if they, you know, if you're able to listen to what they're saying and say, well, you know, I understand why you might believe that, but in reality, this is what's actually going on, right? So it's really more about interrupting a thought process that may have been going on for years and years and years, and really understanding that some people may have struggled with that and may take a long time. But because it's, you know, something isn't difficult, if something was easy, you know, everyone would do it. But if something is difficult, then it's probably worth doing. So that's all I will add on this point.
Thank you, Dr. Powell. No, I agree with you completely. And that point came back to everybody that it was that us fighting for equality right now, it's attacking people with privilege, basically. Like the people who get to act as if nothing is going on in this world, like to act like you were just saying, like all these things that are systematically instilled into this world, they act like it doesn't exist. So it's like the fact that we're basically trying to attack oppression and the fact that we don't, you know, have our equal rights and stuff like that, it makes people like with privilege feel like, you know, we're, you know, trying to take something away from them. But it's like, we're not trying to take anything away from you. We're just trying to gain just exactly what we haven't been offered. And it should be, you know, rightfully ours and stuff like that. Our next question in the chat from Mr. Burgess, is social injustice and racial discrimination of the Black community is such a broad issue. What are the primary objectives we should focus on in order to bring about change? Do any of the panelists want to speak upon that?
I thought, Dr. Robinson's introductory remarks kind of began to touch upon this to a good extent, about just kind of what particular tactics and objectives we ought to be focusing on if we want to affect real change. The only thing I'll add to that is that, I know a lot of the conversation is necessarily, not this conversation per se, but just the broader conversation has necessarily been trained on policing. And police are a huge part of the problem. But as a couple of folks pointed out earlier on, it's systemic racism, structural inequality, persistent poverty, stratification across the board. That's at the fundamental core, I think, of a lot of this, along with just our really kind of nasty history with racism. And so, there's not, I think any focus, any approach that doesn't focus more broadly is doomed to fail, because as Dr. Powell pointed out, there are thousands of police departments, and there can be consent decree after consent decree after consent decree, but really we have to address kind of what's at the root of it too, to really bring about some kind of systemic change.
I kind of like to dovetail off of what Mohamed said, in that a lot of it is creating more awareness, education around many of these issues, structural issues that have occurred for a very long time. I know someone mentioned the point that a lot of officers don't actually live in the neighborhoods where they police, which means they don't have a good understanding of the individuals that they are policing. And when you see individuals as people, when you get to know them, when you get to know their background and their behaviors, why they do the things they do, why they feel what they feel, you are more inclined to treat them as you would anybody else who you perceive as a friend or someone you want to get to know. And so having a larger understanding, creating more awareness and education broadly so that people get to know each other, I think gets to this idea of a better understanding within our communities for everybody. So.
I'd have to agree with that too. Just
Yeah. Can I add one thing too?
Yeah, of course.
So look, I'll try to keep this somewhat brief, but kind of thinking about the question, right? What are the primary objectives we should focus on in order to bring about change? When I hear questions like that, which I know are coming from a good place and are coming from a real strong sense of mission, I would caution us about trying to find the silver bullet, trying to find what's the one thing that we're going to do that's going to just be the breakthrough. And I would caution us against worrying too much about that, because when I look in history, I see lots of examples where they weren't necessarily sure that they had the right answer. They weren't necessarily sure they had the one issue, but like-minded folks picked an issue, moved forward, and actually were able to build a path as they went, right? And so one example I would give is thinking about the Montgomery bus boycott, right? This pivotal moment in the civil rights movement, mid-1950s. What was the issue? Well, it was about busing, right? It was about being treated with respect when riding on the bus. And it primarily impacted women, Black women, who had to catch the bus to go work as domestic servants in the homes of white folks across town, right? So if we think today is something similar, would we all agree that, busing and how you're treated on the bus and how that impacts African-American rights, that's going to be the one issue that's going to break open this whole system of segregation? Well, maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. But as we look back now, it all looks like it all kind of fell into line in this kind of perfect, boom, boom, boom kind of it was of course going to be the great breakthrough. I think that's sort of the lesson from history is we never know what's going to be the thing, right? We never know what's going to be the key moment or the key issue that leads to things. But what we do know is that by moving forward, by picking a direction, by becoming organized, we can create opportunities that then other things can come out of that, right? We create a sort of like a space or a kernel, plant a seed, which can go in all kinds of ways that can manifest 5 years, 10 years down the road in surprising ways. And so I think we can feel some, take the pressure off. To say we don't have to necessarily have it all figured out when we start. We don't have to have all the answers when we begin. We don't have to know exactly what the path is going to be. But through collective action, through organizing together, through building that shared vision and moving forward, we'll learn as we go. And I think that's actually what happened more times than not as we look in history.
Thank you, Dr. Robertson, Dr. Norris, Dean Mohammed, for those remarks. And I'm gonna check with my tech person. Jeremy, if you could chime in, could you let us know how we're doing on time today? If we have time for more questions?
Definitely, yeah.
Okay.
Definitely good for time. If you guys want to go 90 minutes or if you want to go a little bit longer like we did last week, as you know, in terms of the panelists' availability, that's the key factor.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm gonna move it along on the Q&A. We have a question coming in from Justin Well, which is my SAR brother, as Anthony Roberson mentioned earlier, the Student African American Brotherhood here on the Cal State San Bernardino's campus. His question is, and before we get into the question, you know, 2019 was a struggling year for the CSUSB campus student-wise, because we had many things diverting us, you know, heavy winds, fire threats, even power outages that the campus went through and experienced that kind of left students out in the wind, you know, and left professors on you know, out there as well, as far as pushing back due dates on things like that. So in the spirit of that, when we've approached power outages and high wind factors coming in today's climate and everything that's going on, Justin's question is, basically from the professor's standpoint, why aren't many of the professors obligating, you know, or at least attaching what's going on to what's due? Because during this time, we are in finals or approaching finals when you know, in the spirit of today's injustices, but students are left inclined to what's going on in today's climate over submitting papers on time. So due to that, we have many professors in the room if they would like to chime in, because Justin's question also referred to professors actually not even addressing the issues of what's going on, and how that affected them as well.
So I want to weigh on this one. Justin, thank you for the question. And I appreciate so much what the students are going through, but the faculty are going through that too. That we're all in this moment together, and there's a part of me that feels it's unfair to assume that the faculty are not being responsive because, you know, we're sitting in our ivory towers and we don't want to, and maybe there are a percentage of them who are. But let me assure you that I've been fielding emails for 2 weeks from colleagues who are saying, you know, can I, should I, to what extent, how do I, understanding that some of our students need these grades, need these exams because they're going on to graduate programs, they're going into another stage of their professional lives. So how do you give some people a pass or an opportunity to come late and let some, I mean, and those are hard questions, right? And I think, I would like to think that there is a larger majority, if it's 52%, that's still a majority, right? That are trying to figure out ways to deal with it. And the second part of that is, how do you have that discussion? You know, I appreciate everyone in this discussion and everyone in the discussion last week who was as open as they are, because some of us are hurting as much as you are. And that's the staff and the faculty, and trying to say, okay, but the grades are going to be due on this date. I said the paper was going to be due then. Do I disadvantage the student if I say, no, 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 you can have another week? Is that helping you, or is that putting more on your plate when you were thinking, I'm gonna get this done and move into the next phase of my life? So there's a lot to wrestle with there. I wish we were all better taught as teachers, or let me speak for myself. I wish I had been better prepared, but I can tell you, when I started teaching, I never in my life thought I would have to be trained for a active shooter drill. Right? I thought the worst I was going to have to do was stop, drop, and roll in the case of the atomic bomb. That's how old I am. All right. You know what I mean? So an event like this, in this unprecedented way, we had the same thing happen at 9/11. We had the same thing. I mean, so that's not to give anyone a pass. That's just to point out. I think we all found ourselves in a difficult place. If there is an adjustment that you feel that needs to be made, let me point out to you that there are advisors, there's an ombudsperson, there are people who can help you respond if you really feel like you've been unfairly treated, particularly in this circumstance. And the university is willing to do some things to address that. So that's my 2.5 cents.
I would like to agree, and also kind of point out that it's a tough situation for us too. And when you talk about, if we were in the classroom, I would have an easier time figuring out how to reach the subject with my students. But in this online setting, we're going to be emailing back and forth. Tone is implied sometimes. People oftentimes don't get what individuals are trying to say. And it is difficult for some professors to figure out, how do I talk about this to my students, especially when it doesn't really relate to what the larger class is about. I've had an easier time because my classes were basically about many of these issues, and I had students emailing me saying, oh, we just read about this. I'm like, yes, we did, unfortunately. This idea that these actually apply to things I talk about, so it was easy for me to broach the subject. But as someone else, how do you know? It's hard to know what to say. And so it's a difficult situation for all of us. It's not that individuals don't care or they don't understand what students are going through, but it is hard to figure out how to approach this subject, especially in these times that we're in with the social distancing, the pandemic. We don't see our students face to face. It's been, difficult in many different ways.
And I promise I'm not going to weigh in on everything, but I agree with them. I've received a lot of emails from faculty who don't know what to do, but they want to do something, and lots of emails going back and forth among faculty about just statements of empathy. But I think Jacob brings up something later in the Q&A, which is worth pointing out, which is that a lot of people, a lot of our faculty, I mean, aside from all of us going through this together, but experiencing it in different ways, a lot of our faculty, as Dr. Norris just said, don't know what to do. A lot of that is like people are saddled with guilt. I mean, in some cases, to have this epiphany after this has been happening for so long, folks just don't know what to say, and they're fearful of saying the wrong thing, which I think is also part of the issue.
I'd have to agree with that. A lot of the times when I'm having different conversations with different people, that's the first step. It's like, if we're open to have a conversation to where I know that you are not trying to microaggress me, then it's like, I'll be able to, at least come to a point where I won't be offended. Like I could, we're also grown. We can have those conversations, stuff like that. And then to our faculty and staff that are, being, feeling guilty or something like that. Honestly, what I would say to that is to get to know your black students and your black faculty and your black staff more. I mean, opposed to like, I don't know how you know them within the workplace, but in terms of your black students, like knowing where they come from and just knowing exactly why they are exactly who they are, that will make you understand, you know, us more as a people. Because a lot of us have lived the same exact lives, because we all have to go through the same thing. We've all been fighting the same this oppressive fight, you know, generation after generation. So it's like we all pretty much have lived similar lives. Also, because being Black, all the inadequacies we have to face within life, they're pretty much the same stuff because of, you know, poverty and impoverished neighborhoods and stuff like that. So just getting to know exactly why we are the way we are is a better way to know exactly how to navigate those conversations and actually know how to approach different people, because it's like we have to approach these people in these different areas regardless, because it's like we want to improve, and those are the only areas where there's, you know, improvement, because in terms of our own neighborhood, we still haven't got to the point where we could build within ourselves. We always have to go and seek out elsewhere. So it's like we have to navigate in those areas, and it's like we have to learn how to adapt to those areas. But it's like nobody takes the time to consider or to adapt to the people that we are, or just exactly what we have gone through. Like, we should just think about something as simple as hair. Like, it's unprofessional to wear braids or to wear afro in certain areas, but it's like, what? Okay, so what? Like, is there a set thing that is professionalism? Because I mean, like, if I could speak to you the way I could speak to you, if I could navigate the conversation how we can, then it's like, why does it matter how my hair looks and everything like that? It's just, we need to learn how to not only us, because we don't, you know, necessarily feel like we should be the ones taking, you know, the first initiative, being that, you know, we still haven't been heard after all this time. But we still do need to make that more open, because I know there are different allies, there are different people who actually want to be a part of that help and be a part of that change. And because we don't know exactly who to trust in terms of this, because it always ceases, or it always makes it to where the conversation is not being held, or it isn't getting across thoroughly. But the more open we get to having those conversations, and the more people that actually, you know, take the initiative to get to know us as a people, and to, you know, help the ones that need to, you know, need more things provided to them in terms of their community and stuff like that. Like, when we're talking about like the police reform and everything like that, defunding the police and everything, our police should not be more funded than our healthcare workers, and more equipped than our healthcare workers during the time of a pandemic. Like, our nurses, our doctors, they could even get face masks and stuff like that, but every cop out there has, you know, a riot shield and riot mask and tear gas and stuff like that. So it's like, why are there neighborhoods to where it's like people are being trained to be criminals and trained to be within the system and to go to prison or to get killed by police, but it's like cops are just getting funded to stop us from ever disobeying the law, when it's like they're not even obeying it? So I don't know. It's a lot of stuff that's within this world that's just permanently instilled, and it's like, unless we make it to where we break that, then it's like forever going to be permanently instilled.
It's a few things in there that you touched on, and Justin, if you're listening, great question. And to the professors that chimed in, I want to say too, I'm pretty sure that all students, if there are any students still in the chat room that are listening, I'm sure they have a better view of understanding where the professor's standpoint lies in this moment as well. We're all facing, you know, this situation, these circumstances, this pandemic as well, all together. You know, we're all facing the same thing, and we're all trying to figure it out together. This is a new standpoint that we're all facing. How to continue your education, and so that you can get the benefits of the hard work that you have put in without holding you back, or, you know. So from the student standpoint, and then hearing from the professor, I know we have a better understanding of, you know, just trying to cross that finish line. You know, the more you put into it, you know, the faster we can approach it and get through it, and we can move on to the next stages. Like Professor Irvin said, some people have jobs that they're trying to, or careers that they're trying to dive into without holding others back. So, and without holding yourself back. And we're not even calling it making excuses, but and Kathy Irvin, again, she touched on it in her opening statement about adjusting to the changes that are being made as they're being made. So just as a student, I want to touch on that. And Cameron, you also said it was once upon a time when we faced where our appearance was being challenged in the workplace and in the world as well. And I remember being raised, you know, my grandmother raised me, and she would always tell me as a kid, and I didn't understand it as a kid until I got older, but, you know, you'll never get a job with your hair like that. Always keep a low cut haircut, always be presentable, you know. And I probably took it too far. You know, I wouldn't check the mailbox unless I was fully dressed, you know. I wouldn't even go out to the curb, you know, take out the trash. But we was always presentable and always perceiving ourselves as less of a threat because we know that we're feared, and you know, anything can happen at any moment. But all these things coming back to me in an older age, but I would always think to myself without talking back to my grandmother that, well, I'll get a job no matter how my hair look. You know, I'm gonna challenge this world. And sure enough, you know, these things started to come into fruition as we got older, that they started dismantling those probes of, you know, what professionalism looks like, you know. And as Cameron said, you know, if I could sit at any table, I feel like I belong in any room, then it doesn't matter how my appearance comes off. And just not to take, if anybody else want to chime in, I didn't want to take anything else from any other panelists in the room.
Yeah, let me just say a quick note, just to echo what Professor Ervin said earlier. For all the students out there, if you feel like your professors are being unreasonable, you definitely have the permission, the right to ask them or to explain your situation and request some kind of adjustment. And if you feel like you've done that and you haven't gotten an appropriate response, take it to their department chair, right? A lot of students don't realize that, you know, it's within your, you know, rights as a student to ask the professor for some kind of adjustment. If that's not satisfactory, talk to the department chair, explain the situation to them and ask for some kind of, you know, adjustment. And if you don't get the response you're looking for from the department chair, you can talk to the dean, right? Dean Mohammed? Yeah, you can't see him, but he's nodding his head, yes.
Yeah. You can, and we actually have an assistant dean in our office who handles like all students' complaints, all student issues from beginning to end, and takes really good care of our students, so yes.
Right, so there is a mechanism, and of course there's the Ombudsman's office and others, but I want the students to know that there is, you do have the ability, and you shouldn't feel shy about advocating for yourself if you feel that's appropriate. Hopefully all my students are happy. You know, I've been working with them and emailing, but, you know, for all those other professors, you know, tell on them.
Thank you. We are going to keep it moving because I do want to get to as many questions as we can, because you guys have some great questions, and we have an awesome panel here that I'm sure that can get these answered for you. I'm going to tackle James D. Simon's question, and I'm just going to read the whole thing so that we can get it verbatim. I have intense discussions with friends, family, and acquaintances, and one argument that is frequently used is that the increased police violence against Black Americans is due to disproportionate crime rates in Black communities. It is frustrating to hear this argument because it often prevents people from seeing the historical and systemic racism that is contributed to the current situation. How do you begin to open up people's eyes to the systemic racism and all of the complex nuances related to this issue?
I mean, I said I would. It's a great question, James. And I think some of our CJ folks might be able to weigh in a little. I'm not putting y'all on the spot just because you're in our college, but just from, you know, there are systemic racism is a fundamental issue. There are higher crime rates in certain kind of communities. I won't take you on a tour through a criminology class that goes back to the work of like Sean McKay and folks like that who looked at kind of areas rather than people. I think our tendency in our society has been to assign higher crime rates to particular racial or ethnic groups rather than looking at the structural conditions that are really at the root. But to the specific question at the end, so I've done some research on drugs and drug dealers and drug dealing subcultures and things like that. You look at the single largest contributor to our prison population boom from 1980 until the early 2000s, and it was the war on drugs and how that kind of ratcheted up incarceration rates. And the one little point of evidence that I would highlight in this conversation with anybody is if you look at the growth in prison populations over the course of the war on drugs, and then look at who uses drugs, it's grossly disproportionate. Drug use rates tend to be consistent among different racial and ethnic groups in the population in terms of their representation in the population, but African Americans and to a lesser extent Latinos were overwhelmingly overrepresented in terms of folks who were incarcerated, and part of that is because of over-policing of these areas. I would give a plug for a book I wrote, but I won't go there. but I mean, you look around and crime is committed by lots of different kinds of people, but police tend to focus on, on groups where there are already biases against these groups, lower hanging fruit where people don't have the same amount of recourse to either legal defense or just outcomes in the criminal justice system. So there are all kinds of things at play. But when folks say that it's just they're looking where the crime is, there could be nothing farther from the truth, with a couple of exceptions. Anyway.
Yeah, I will piggyback off of what Dean Mohamed said. Oftentimes it is, so if we look at things like self-report studies, what people say they do, we see the same types of crimes, we see people committing the same types of crimes, but certain people are actually policed for committing those crimes. And so they talk about things like drug use. Have you committed, for instance, a delinquent act? So when you were a child, did you ever commit something that was a status offense that you weren't supposed to do? Well, yeah, most people have committed what we would consider status offenses or delinquent acts when they were younger, but only certain people are actually punished for those acts. And so oftentimes it is a matter of, well, yes, if police are more likely to be in certain neighborhoods, of course they're going to catch those individuals committing crimes, and therefore crime rates in those neighborhoods will be higher. When the same types of crimes are happening other places, police just aren't there in a sense to catch them. And so it is one of those things that we see as part of the issue. When you talk about crime rates, you're talking about what police arrest, not actually what people do. And I think that tends to be a major disconnect between how people view that issue.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Can I weigh in on this one just a little bit? At the end of this really great question, how do you begin to open up people's eyes to the complex nuances? And I'm going to come back to the cultural piece, because it's not that difficult if you're somebody who regularly watches TV to keep track of who's in charge of the story. Whose story is being told. There was a time period about 10 years ago, I don't watch a lot of television, when almost all of the police captains were Black women. Epatha Murkison, Malia Rucker. There were several Black women represented as the chief of police. And I said, is that a real representation of what's happening in the police world? I don't know. But that was very interesting. That's not true anymore. Right? So and then when we focus in on police stories or medical stories or pioneer stories, who's in the story? Where are the Black people? Where are the Latino people? Where are the Asian people? And is it their story, or are they the sidekick supporting? And this may be one way to get people to just sort of say, wow, I was watching TV all night and there were 2 Black people in there. And both of them were the assistant principal who walked through a scene and somebody else. So that the representation, as Dr. Norris and Dr. Mohamed have pointed out, the representation doesn't gel. What we're being told, what we're being shown, what the facts are, those things don't always line up. And maybe to begin to build awareness of those small differences.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Professor Irvin, and thank you, Dr. Norris. I really appreciate you guys' points. Everything you guys talked about, I believe it is straight fact, and it's real. It's all of the points you guys are making, and all the points that you guys are talking about really need to be resonating in people's minds. Just exactly how you know, it's a fact, and just how we are going to go about, you know, making the changes that we need to. I would also like to get to this question. If anybody in the panel could answer this, is from Sally McGill. She said, I read in an editorial that police officers are protected by contracts in which that the standards that must be met before disciplining an officer are higher than the standards for convicting someone of a crime, and that there are contract provisions that require expunging past complaints from an officer's record, which make it difficult to establish a pattern of behavior. Would any panelists like to comment on this, or on avenues to work with police unions for reform? And I'll also, this question goes into another question that we have, which is from Roby Madrigal, which is, what would meaningful police reform look like? And just to address this while I'm still speaking, I just believe what we need to do is defund them, because they shouldn't have this much money within, you know, a department that is to protect and serve its citizens, when right now it feels like it's at war against its citizens. Like the people within the United States that are looting, rioting, you know, peaceful protesting, standing in the middle of the streets just to be heard and stuff like that, those citizens didn't change. Those are still American citizens. So it's like we're outraged at the fact that we have to go against our law, and our law is breaking the law. This is that, like, that's the outrage. The outrage is that our own law enforcement is breaking the law, and it's against a specific demographic of people for the majority, but you know, it's still against a lot of different oppressed people. And the problem that we've all pretty much been talking on is that there is impoverished neighborhoods and stuff like that, to where we are basically programmed to become criminals. We are programmed to beat the odds and to become something greater that will fit within a system that is even built for you. So it's like there needs to be less money going into the organization that chooses who is a criminal and who isn't a criminal. And there needs to be more money that are going to these neighborhoods, and it's like everybody could have a comfortable way of living, and more opportunity within their own neighborhoods. Because like there are, like, think about all the police and all the police departments and stuff, and how much they've been being funded. And then you could think about a neighborhood that is impoverished and how many good tutors they have, or how many good teachers they have and stuff like that. Like there's a huge difference. And you know, the fact that we have to face all of those inadequacies in life, and then people act like we're not facing any change, like there isn't a difference in our living. It's really disrespectful to us as a people. But if anybody else would like to talk upon that topic.
Have a comment. So I think with respect to Roby Madrigal's question about what would meaningful police reform look like, I think we should look back to what Dr. Robinson said earlier, is that this needs to be a collective vision, and it's not something that any one group of people really benefits, because the police serve everyone in society, you know, so it's not any particular segment. It shouldn't be anyone's class position in society, regardless of their ethnic or religious background. I mean, it's something that when we think about police reform, it needs to be a collective effort to deciding it. You know, so I won't sit here and say, well, this is exactly what we need to do, right? Because like, I'm just one person, right? I think some starting points to maybe consider, like in conversations on these panels or just in the public forum, is, you know, identifying what exactly do we dislike about police? Do we, you know, some might say is that we probably dislike the fact that it's a culture of control, that the police are used to control crime. They're not really used, I would say, in some cases they are, but in some cases they are not really seen as to be allies, right? They're, you know, trained to come in, kick down doors or something like that. I would think that if we want to have meaningful police reform, it does involve changing who becomes a police officer. And so how do we recruit people to become police officers who maybe have good intentions? You know, it's pretty interesting to me. So I teach a policing course in criminal justice, and many students want to become police officers. That may be why they became in the criminal justice department. And I often show recruiting videos. One's for San Bernardino PD, because it's local, and the other one is from a town I used to live in, Plano, Texas. And if you look at the videos for San Bernardino, right, they're very different, right? Like San Bernardino, like, you know, they talk about the perks of living in Southern California. You get a lot of action. You know, it's really high-paced, intense, like, work environment. And you look at Plano PD, And they're very much, like, we strive to cooperate, we want to work with the community, and we want to be allies and things like that. So they're sending different messages as to who they want to recruit. And even though they do the same mission, police people, right, whatever we expect them to do, it's interesting to see the responses. Most everyone wants to go work for San Bernardino PD because it seems like a high octane, intense, fun kind of job, and being an ally, cooperating with the community seems really boring, right? And so there's a selection effect into who wants to become a police officer, why it's an appealing position. So I think we should probably have some hard conversations about how we recruit people and getting the right people into becoming police officers. And that is consistent with a collective vision of what we want them to look like. So the other part is that if we think about in terms of like reform, like, yes, we probably absolutely want to change use of force procedure, standards, training, how to de-escalate situations. Part of the defund police conversations happening now is certainly about defunding maybe like military control, maybe it's defunding how much overtime is allocated, but I think there also needs to be conversations about how much we're willing to take away, and to what and how long were we willing to do it, and what would happen if there was a crime rate spike, right? Are we going to revert back and just give money back to advocating for control? Or are we going to be consistent on this like marathon to changing police reform? So I think it's something we should probably think about. And all these issues are, there's no simple answer, right? But all the conversations that come out are really important to think about. So I like these conversations. It really stimulates my job, and I love hearing from all the other panelists here and all the other questions. I don't know if anyone wants to talk about that, but I also have a comment for Sally McGill's piece, but I'll defer to someone else. We can get back to that one.
I was going to chime in on Sally's piece. There was an article in the paper this morning that New York State passes a bill to unveil police discipline records, and I think that that there are several states now that are going back and saying, what is the cloak of secrecy that allows police officers to operate in certain kinds of ways without any kind of oversight or recrimination. Interestingly enough, underneath it, there's an article that says fired Atlanta officers file suit against mayor and chief. So, that controversy is going to have a long life, I think.
Yeah. Because that was actually a question I had for both of you guys. I really appreciate you guys' points in terms of this reform, like being that in terms of this question that we have within the editorial, she said that before disciplining a police officer, there are higher standards than convicting someone of a crime. We want the people who are within the system and that are upholding this racist system, in terms of racial discrimination, all these racial injustices, we want them fired. That's point blank. And the people that are actually, trying to implement change and are actual advocates of it, we want them appointed. And it's like, how can we go about doing things like that in terms of, is there a way where we can get a specific group of people appointed to where they will be because it's like police are, they policing each other right now in terms of the stuff that they do. Like, they're speaking to each other in terms of whether it's justly or not. So it's like, can we have people to where they're within the community and they can define whether it was it was racial discrimination or it was injustices upon just because of race or anything like that? Would we be able to do anything like that or have that implemented?
Sort of like town halls for police and community?
Yeah, honestly, to where it's like we will be like, because then they will know that they will be held accountable for their actions. So then it's like, being that is, hopefully, God willing, we stop dying as much as we're dying if they know that they will be held accountable, not by their own people, but by the people.
Right. Definitely agree. As we wrap up, because we're approaching that marker, I did want to I wanted to ask you guys a final question coming from our attendees today, and this question will be coming from Evelyn Nuss. But before I get to her question, there was a question earlier that hinted on upon whose fight this is. And there was a comment made by Mike. Mike comment said, many Asian Americans may not realize that Black Americans were at the forefront of the civil rights fight that related to things like the Chinese Exclusion Act, Japanese internments, and others that affect the Asian Americans. So there it is. This is all of our fight. It don't matter what shade or color you are, or ethnicity or background you're from. There's justice to be served that could affect you, your child, your grandchildren. In the future, we all should be at the forefront fighting for equality, inclusiveness, inclusivity, I'm sorry, and just justice for all. So that was a comment made by Mike, and I wanted to get to that. But a final question to our panelists, we're gonna leave it to about 1 minute to 2 minutes for each to respond. And this, again, it comes from Evelyn Knox, is, where's all your courage coming from to have these important conversations? How are you all persisting in serving others when you're so underserved as Black men, or Black men and women? And thank you, Evelyn, for that question. And I'll give everyone a chance to make their final statements regarding this question. And while I have the mic, I can just say my energy comes from the people. I know for myself, I see myself as a big brother to my peers on the CSUSB campus, someone that's lived through these traumas and not let them define me, but to write my own narrative, to get out there and protect others from things happening to them that could happen to them, and prevent, other men of color from becoming the next hashtag. And just really encompassing themselves in career mindedness, and really sharing that, and again, bringing that up the ladder, reaching back and showing others that way. Again, the old motto of, if I can see it, I can achieve it. It's important to talk to our youth, show them who we are, what we're about, so that they can see themselves as becoming of that. If they see more Anthony Robersons and Dean Mohameds, they'll strive to become, that they won't settle to, I can probably only, they would leave that mindset and strive for the most. So that's how I serve. That's how I find my strength. I find my strength by making sure that this doesn't happen to anyone else.
I'm going to co-sign on that, Marlo. I'm with you. I get my energy from the people.
Yeah, I agree. And I think silence is betrayal, right? I think if we're silenced and we're not speaking up and having these hard conversations, the problems will still go on. I think we have to be courageous in our conversations with people, and understanding our plight, and making sure that we educate one another, and as well as educate ourselves. I think we get the opportunity to work with wonderful student leaders like you, Marlo, and Cameron, and that's where I get my energy from, on a daily basis, getting to work with wonderful young Black men like you guys, and changing our generations and being agents of change. And I know I'm going to see you guys in corporate, boardrooms, making change. And that's what it's about. And that's why I do this every day, and that's why when this conversation and George Floyd and those things happened, I seen you guys, right? I would hate to get a phone call and that be one of you guys. So that's why I'm having these conversations.
Yeah, if I could just chime in quickly, in terms of the the strength, it comes from, as Anthony just said, from seeing young folks invested in making change. That really inspires me, and also from from people that came before me, from my mother, my grandmother, and everybody of their generations who fought in arguably more trying times to make it easier for us, has shown me that some degree of progress is possible, that it's worth continuing to move forward. And finally, I've been teaching for a long time, and just in the past couple of weeks, I've received messages from students I haven't heard from in a decade, who have just said, I took this class with you, we talked about these things, I think I understand the world a lot better for it, thank you. And so it's that kind of affirmation that knows that makes me feel like I'm not just kind of talking into an abyss. And so yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I agree. Just wanting to see a change is something that sparks wanting to talk out. I speak about these things in my classes all the time, and so I'm constantly talking about them. I want to see change, and so I tell my students and I push for them to understand these issues and understand the broader social context. And when the student emails me after a class and says, they really got something out of the class, or it's something that really resonated with them, I was like, well, at least one person was listening to me. And even if it was just that one person, that's all it takes for me to want to continue to do it for the next one out of 100-something students who were in my class and said, yes, I get that, I understand. It is something I also feel strongly about now too. And so, and then it's a ripple effect. That one person may affect hundreds of other people. And so even starting from that one individual, you may have a ripple effect down the line. And that's why I like doing it.
Let me co-sign on what's been said thus far. And also I think it's important to remember what Professor Ervin told us earlier about, this is a marathon, right? When it comes to pushing for change, when it comes to addressing injustice, there are folks who have been in this fight before we got here. And there's folks who have been in this fight for years and for decades. And so if we remember that, if I remind myself of that, I think about how can I be effective, not just today, not just tomorrow, but for the next 10 years, the next 20 years, the next 30 years, and beyond. And when I think about it in that context as a marathon, well, then of course I need to make sure that I do the self-care. I need to make sure that I reach out to people who can support me and who I can support. I want to make sure that I'm in community with those who are like-minded and who are positive and who are encouraging, so that I can keep going and I can help others keep going. I think all those things, are part of what helps me to keep from getting discouraged.
Dr. Powell?
I guess same. I don't know that I have much to add to what's already been said, but I think, part of why I started this field of study, why, I continued, to study criminal justice and policing, police reform issues, is that growing up, these issues were not talked about in my home, and they weren't talked about in my community, and it was seen as the police just exist. And so when I think back when I was a student, there are professors I still think about to this day, often, all the time, and what the most important thing that I can think about is that they really opened my eyes to show me something I had never thought about before, or in a way I had never thought about before. And I think part of why I'm here having this kind of conversations and why I chose to be a professor is that there's nothing like hearing a student say, I used to have a really hard set opinion about something, and you opened me up to a new perspective, new way of thinking like that. And so on important issues like this, I think it's important to have really difficult conversations about things that have been ongoing and wrong for a long time. And I would like to help educate anyone who wants to listen, and hopefully, spread it along to someone else.
Most definitely. I would really just, before I even give off my final remarks, I just want to say, thank you to all of the panelists. I really appreciate this conversation. Much appreciated to everybody that has, took part in, the question, the Q&A and everything like that. Everybody that has pretty much got on the Zoom to listen in on this conversation. I appreciate you guys as well. I hope you guys took something meaningful out of the conversation and stuff like that. In terms of this, something that keeps me courageous in terms of everything that's going on is seeing all the different generations that are out there fighting. Just seeing, older people, and then just also thinking that could be somebody that's, an older generation with that you know, I'm close with, and just in younger generations, I just think of, you know, that could be like my little cousins, that could be my little sister, that could be just, you know, anybody that's within my family. So that's honestly keeping me courageous in terms of being out and protesting and stuff like that, knowing that when you go out there, it's like war basically. You have to know that there are racist people, there are you know, it's just it's so much within that world that could happen. So it's like knowing that you're a part of you're going to be a part of the change and stuff like that is honestly what keeps me going. Knowing that I have an opportunity to provide for, you know, the people like me who didn't have people to provide for them. I try my best to be in a space to where I could, you know, be on both sides, because it's like in terms of people who've been down on their luck and they have to live in those neighborhoods that are in poverty, and they have to live day to day, and they have to live based off of survival and everything like that. Like I see myself in those same people. So it's like, being that I could amount to what I've amounted to, I believe if they were given the chance, they would be able to amount to the same thing that I've amounted to. But, you know, just trying to make it to where this world knows just exactly how complex it is and how much there is to navigate throughout it. I saw another question that was just recently put into the Q&A, and it was saying, often I think about what I would, should, and could do had I been a bystander watching, you know, a murder like that, in terms of what happened to George Floyd. And it's tough, because that's a tough situation, because it's like, if you do anything to them, you're against the law, stuff like that. So it's like, I don't know if you want to give a point about this, Dr. Powell or Dr. Norris, in terms of this. If we're watching something like this, you know, basically the police commit murder, and, you know, they're saying the person isn't being, you know, isn't complying or anything like that, what can we do to stop this?
I think, you know, what is both unfortunate, but also fortunate, is that before, you know, it's, you know, if you've ever seen like a fight that happens right between normal people, I would say it's rare for anyone to say, well, let me jump in right that, right? And it's especially hard to do with police officers who are much better equipped, better trained than any of us, right? And so while we may be tempted to intervene in that situation physically, it's only inviting a lot more trouble for you, where you're risking your own injury or death, or a criminal lawsuit. And the fact of the matter is that the mark of a criminal record, even just a simple arrest, carries on much longer than anyone probably realizes. In terms of what you should do, while, you know, is to make it visual. Historically, a lot of police decisions and actions are hidden because there was no technology, there's poor supervision, no one's around, or you could, you know, scare and bully people away. I think the only way to bring light to these issues is to film them as they record, and the Supreme Court has endorsed that as a right for everyone in this country to record police incidents like that. So make it aware, make it known, share it, and bring attention to it, because if nothing happens and there's no attention to it, nothing will happen.
Yeah, I agree with Zach. They talk what happens in the dark will come to light. What we have seen the past 5-6 years is people see it now, and that is where the outrage is coming from. And so the people who were there recording with their cell phones, there were 3-ish different angles. If you kind of look at what they said before the videos came out, and then what people saw, it is one of those things where bringing it to light is really what we can do, because you don't want to step in, because it will, you know, you could harm yourself, and it may not have the intended outcome, but bringing it to light, recording or making it visual, is really what has prompted a lot of these protests, a lot of the outrage over the past 5-6 years. When we've seen all of these incidents that we talk about are incidents we have seen. There have been other incidents that have been unseen, but we don't talk about them because we haven't seen them. What we see, people can fight for.
Right, right. So as we close, guys, I want to bring attention to one comment that was made. We had the honor of being, we had an attendant today, President Tomas Morales in the building, and he had a few remarks he wanted to say as he exited. He said, "Thank you, panelists and organizers of this program. I greatly appreciate and value your commitment to our community." That is coming from President T. Morales himself. And I myself want to extend that thanks and would like to remind our guests that each week, each Wednesday at 4 p.m., we will be continuing the conversations on race and policing and getting different perspectives from different faculty, staff, community organizers, and beyond on the approach and the methods we'll be taking following these tragic events, and just keeping you up on today's climate, the issues, and again, I just want to say thank you to all involved, from background to our panelists. I want to say a special thanks to my co-host, KAMERON, my brother, my friend. Here's to another great week on the channel itself. And finally, I just want to say we define the future. And KAMERON, did you want to chime in any last words?
No, I appreciate you too, bro. To everybody out there, I just, pray that you guys stay safe at this time, during the pandemic, during protesting during the pandemic. And, I do pray we do see change, and not only just waiting to see change, but let's implement change.
Thank you, guys. It was great having you. I guess we'll see y'all next week.
Mm-hmm.